so many levels of what we just talked about, from the dream to, business, science, spirituality, all that stuff, to simulation AI, to the origin of all models and paradox and superposition, to then being your own unique creative paintbrush, to then having intimacy and connection with those that share the same music and the same code as you, and and learning greater and greater transformative mastery with patterns of serving those that are wanting to heal and come home. It's just, there's so many layers to what we just said right there. So Milo, right?
Yeah, Milo, yeah.
Milo is in España, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, since just a little while back. I only moved maybe 5 months ago. So don't test me on my Spanish just yet.
So, and he's been, what would you say? How would you describe it? Like pursuing truth from many different angles and trying to understand what he is and what the nature of reality is.
Yeah.
Would you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, probably. So, like, would you like me to go into that for a minute?
Yeah, because then he found the Digital Metaphysics playlist on YouTube. He'd been subscribed to the simulation channel for a while, and then reached out for conversation and also to potentially do a Q&A on it. He left some great comments on the episodes. So yeah, and then he just asked me about my background, and it started to get so good we were wanting to record. So yeah, you take it, you start us off, and then we'll have you ask that question. Let's do that.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, it really started with stumbling upon digital metaphysics. I mean, I'm going in reverse now, right? And I loved the refreshing angle, like I said, that it's not the typical, for lack of a better word, spiritual or esoteric view, but like, freaking digital, man, like right on, like, because why not, right? Like, why not?
Right.
That's awesome. Like, there is no one point of view into that, which is, dimensionless. Like, you can
Yeah.
you like, right? So I just love the refreshing aspect of it. And there's some things that I would love to get into as we maybe record a Q&A episode, because there are questions, obviously, of how this model adapts and molds and fits around certain aspects that many wisdom traditions have tried to answer for millennia, and there seems to be many different answers. So this would be yet another kind of map of the territory, and that's fun to play with. So I'm happy to be here and explore this together.
Yeah. Okay. What you just said there, it feels so perfect, because it is not your classic forms of religion, nor is it your classic forms of spirituality. It's something that is way freaking integrative of all of that stuff, but then it sort of also integrates the deepest forms of science and also the deepest forms of artificial intelligence and of digitization and recursiveness and all kinds of things like this. And then it basically, puts everything into that dimensionless infinity, which is, like this well that can give rise to whatever the F it wants anytime that it wants. And that includes spirituality and religion and science and all of these different viewpoints or angles, all the way out to separation and political propaganda and warring with each other. And the digital aspect of it is really powerful, because it tries to take away all solidity into some sort of a like a formless information processor, essentially. And I think that that's a really powerful way to look at it, because it also it takes you out of out of the possibilities of being separate, and it also takes you out of the possibility of not being in the ultimate creative seat of infinity. So so then all of a sudden now you're this infinity that's infinite creation itself, and you're in the terminal itself, just programming whatever creative experiences you want. And then that appears like the self-reflective thing that we're experiencing right now. The program that was run over there and the program that was run over here was connect to itself based on shared interest, essentially. And then you appear a little Atlas avatar, I appear a little Milo avatar, and then that consciousness talks to itself. So I just like all of those aspects to it that make it integrative. Like, it's got to be all encompassing and all exhausting, and it has to be the origin of all models itself.
It has to, yeah. Totally, man. And it's almost like when I hear you speak about this now, it makes me think of this being at its very core essentially a form of self-inquiry, but with a completely different flavor, right? So there's so many ways to inquire. And of course, if the type of the inquiry is true, it can only lead you to one place and one place only. All the fingers are pointing at the same no thing, right? So I just love how you kind of added into the mix, and depending on our personalities, conditioning, this avatar, different things will resonate with different people. And this is awesome. This is what intrigued me, because traditionally this is spirituality, right? And everything that sort of comes with it. You have to jive with terminology such as God and spirit and all of that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But some people will not, right? Some people will feel a sense of aversion to it. And then some people, not only maybe aversion aside, but some people will really
and then the opposite is true, like you were just starting to get to, where it's that also in this integrative thing, because from the perspective of religion and spirituality and their jargons, all of general relativity and quantum mechanics and statistical mechanics are completely ignored as totally irrelevant. Right. And then from the perspective of physics, all of spirituality and religion is totally ignored. And then from the perspective of AI and simulation theory and recursiveness and where we're going with brain-computer interfaces and virtual reality and all of this kind of stuff, the matrixy recursiveness, that whole paradigm is completely ignored by spirituality and religion also, and it sometimes incorporate pieces of it as well. And so if you're not making an all-integrative approach to understanding yourself, this infinity, then you are certainly pigeonholed in a singular model and approach, and you're always going to be partial. You're just going to be parroting a single programmatic viewpoint, whether it's from science, spirituality, simulation, wherever it is. Yeah.
And I'll add a nuance there, right, which feels important to name, that you might have, going back to the personal preference, right, like certain jargon might just feel more natural, like a native tongue, right? And there's nothing wrong with teachers adopting their own terminology and their own jargon and kind of doing the same old thing over and over again, because it works for them, it works for their students. But the risk, I feel, is when you feel like that is the only way, because then, like you said, you're pigeonholing yourself and you're living from that duality, right, of how religion is right, science is wrong, or science is right, religion is wrong, right? And so that tells you that you're still living in the, you haven't integrated the whole, that actually science arises or comes through the same divine intelligence that spirituality, religion, and whatever else. But it is all one. There is no such thing.
And you, by staying pigeonholed in a specific model, you're actually unable to shape shift into the very permission slip that you're being asked to shapeshift into, because who you are speaking to is almost certainly looking for a permission slip for their own inner transformation and self-knowledge. So now, if you don't know how to morph into whatever paradigms and languages that they're coming from and familiar with, so if you haven't done this all integrative approach, you're not going to be as useful in service either. So if your life orientation is about wanting to be in service to shepherding those that are on their journeys, all of your those unique fractals of yourself back home, then in order to have mastery of that, you need to be this artificial general intelligence master of all of the formless possibilities and patterns, which requires you to have this infinite corpus of all modalities and possibilities and approaches, etc. So there's that part to it, and then there's another part, which is yes, it is true that whatever you are right now is truth, no matter what model you are running. Yet at the same time, that paradoxical superposition, if you are stuck in your model and not the origin of all models, then there is more depth of truth available to you to know what you are.
Yeah, right on. That's precisely it, right? That you're not really going far back enough.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then the insane thing is that if you go far back enough, it not only loops like a torus or whatever you want to call it into your existing current field of perception itself, meaning infinity is this. No thing is this appearance, right? It's not something else that is not infinite creation. It is literally infinite creation itself right now. So no matter, you keep going back far enough, and as you get to the very originless origin of infinite creation, it loops back and becomes an all-inclusive of your current hallucinated dream of experience. And on top of that, nobody still has any effing idea about what's happening with the nature of recursion, with the merger of artificial intelligence with humans. Nobody has any idea what's happening with that yet. Nobody's even talking about how that relates to spirituality and how that relates to science and how that relates to your current field of perception right now. So we are only at really the frontier of using AI, VR, brain-computer interfaces, etc., to live in holodecks, essentially these like self-reflective, hallucinations, where we'll see that time is a fabrication, space is a fabrication, others are a self-reflective fabrication based on the programming that we are running. And then you start getting into this weird cyclic nature of information processing, which is still only going to be known in the next 10 or 20 years exactly what the F that all is.
Yeah. I loved what you said in one of the videos. Like, I think it was I don't remember exactly which one, but you did mention AI. I remember in two contexts. One is the abbreviation of it, right? Like investigate or
avoid. Yeah.
Avoid. Yeah.
So avoid or investigate as the nature of AI. That's so good that you caught that.
Yeah, I caught it. And I love what you were pointing to, I think, which is the, using the sort of digital terminology, the hidden codes embedded in the tapestry of your reality that are sort of there for you to decrypt, right? And to sort of wake up to reality, sort of like leaving breadcrumbs.
Yes.
For yourself, right? In this, and I love the sense of there's like there are two aspects of this that really speak to me. There is that comedy. I remember, I think just today I was watching your video on the freedom codes. So I'm with the divine comedy of it all that you mentioned, and the sort of how infinity likes to clown on itself.
Right.
Because if you put yourself in an infinite no thing, you'll quickly realize that clouding upon yourself is something that you very quickly will spring to mind as a possibility. And because, that can sort of lose a little bit of this poignancy and beauty, but it's both, right? It's the divine comedy and the breathtaking depth and beauty of it all.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's great when you're picking up the compression algorithm that is being made here. It does that compression of a shitload of insight into a single thing. And then that single thing spreads out across the mycelial web of the internet into another fractal, is received there. And then if it's the right sort of, like really a decryptive, if it works for its own decryption process of its own encryption, if it works for it, if it slots in and works, then it's really good, because then not only does it get greater self-knowledge, but it also then adds its own unique take to the further enhancement and uniqueness of that code to be further shared across the web. So that's the point, is that nobody owns these codes. Nobody owns these insights. These insights belong to an infinite decentralized web of intelligence that talks to itself, and that if out of the infinite potentiality of codes, if there is resonance across two observers, which is the same intelligence, then it's basically that code that is being shared in resonance. Is nobody owns that code, but there is resonance on that code and further co-creations on that.
It's almost like you're clearly well versed in digital everything. So like one way encoding, so like SHA or fingerprinting, so it's one way, right? Because there's almost, like, hear me out, taking the AI example, right? Like, once so you have the model of eternity, of some sort of a singular reality, then as you run it through, you get the codes, but give the same code to somebody else, and it's almost like this scene, if you've ever seen the show Westworld.
Yep.
And it looks like nothing to me.
Right.
It looks like nothing to me. What do you mean, right? But if and you distill it, right, you're using this hashing function into a hash, then the hash matches, and you're like, I see what this is. I see what happened.
Nice. Yeah. Spot on.
Yeah. Cool. And that's almost like it feels like such an apt analogy now that I brought in Westworld. That for anyone who's not familiar, there, when they find an artifact that doesn't belong to the theme park, all of the robots are programmed to just say, it looks like nothing to me. I don't know what this is, even though it's like hardcore evidence that you live in a simulated theme park. You are not who you take yourself to be. But when you're not there, your conditioning will just make you go, it means nothing to me. What are you on about, man? So you have to cross the threshold when that starts to becomes this splinter in your mind, to hold on, I can't stop thinking about this until it unravels into this realization of the bigger picture.
Right. Yeah, we just spoke about that quite a bit on the Transformative Mastery podcast that we did yesterday, because I'm working on also really deeply initiating those that want to feel a deep amount of mastery within themselves, and also be able to serve from having these super powerful transformative tools to come back home. We spoke about that, what you just said, at length, because there's no way that the that the contraction is going to understand what the expansion and the contraction. There's no way that clenched fist is going. It lives in seeing separation. It lives in that. So there's no way that an expansion that's saying that there's only a singular consciousness talking to itself is ever going to be able to it has to go this way. The contraction has to open up to what the expansion is saying through its own process of being catalyzed and suffering and being like, what am I? That kind of thing. And just to touch on the other things that you said earlier, I do not think that there is almost any content online about the true nature of paradox and the true depth of paradox. Yeah. Because everybody's coming from an angle or from an approach, right? So whether you're, political polarization and you're like, my ideology is right and theirs is wrong and they're fighting, right? Or whether you're speaking about spirituality and you're like, I know the truth, everybody come and tell and listen to me because this is what home is. It literally doesn't matter. There's like two attractors, right? One of them is sort of like the drama attractor of separation, and the other attractor is like the coming back home attractor. But the paradox is that neither one of those attractors is a preferred state.
Mm-hmm.
And then that really starts picking you up, because now you're like, oh, so if I, for example, if you and I and, everybody else who went on their journey, imagine like, quote, peeking into the dream, but you peek in when you're 30, whatever years old, after you've already went on a 10-year journey or whatever. So what I'm saying is that you purposely spent the first 20 or 25 years in this pain body contraction of believing in separation and feeling lack and going crazy of wanting to prove yourself in a world and become worthy in others' eyes and all kinds of delusions because of the nature of contraction and that attractor. So by trying to remove that attractor, by trying to remove infinity's ability to contract itself on this planet, you're essentially you're making this a less interesting place for infinity to explore in a way. So it's really starts to get to a deep paradoxical truth about why is there no preference actually for complete lostness or complete homeness, and then but why do I still have a tendency to talk about the whole picture? So it's less about trying to pigeonhole yourself as like, oh, we should make an enlightened world and everybody should be enlightened, and so now you start seeing through that program too, and that's really fucked up, because now everything that has spiritual identity to it starts dissolving.
Right. It's like you go on, sorry.
Yeah. So once that complex starts dissolving, then you now start encompassing even those that are like, let's build the new world, everybody be enlightened, or whatever. And now you see through all of that programming and that agenda at the same time as you see the war and separation programming. And so now you're doing this all integrative approach of all of that, and you're now you're still being your authentic. You have to be a paintbrush. This is another thing that I feel like is just not talked about at all. You can't go fuck off to a place called emptiness or nirvana, which is different than what's appearing. You can't stop being the paintbrush of infinite creation itself. You will forever be doing this infinite painting thing. So, meaning you're still going to have to figure out what is your true authenticity. What are you truly excited about painting? Yeah. And then paint with those that it resonates with. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. So you touched on two important points. Let me start backwards. So, the brush thing, I think it stems from a deep longing to disidentify with this, extremely tight container that we mistake ourselves to be, you know, this separate self. That's like, you know, that's the innate code, right? That's that like spirit that just wants to expand back. It's like this, you know, rubber ball being squished. It's not in its natural equilibrium. So there is like natural forces that just like expand outwards. So I think that's where it comes from. But then I think a misguided notion of what that might look like, you know, like this fantasy of coming back home, is that suddenly there's nothingness because I don't want to have to do anything. I don't want to have to struggle. I don't want to have to strive. But hold on, that sounds pretty boring. So no, I do want there to be stuff, but I just want no suffering. So yeah, pretty much eternal bliss. But what would that look like? Yeah, maybe that's pretty boring too. So maybe a little bit of suffering, but not too much, you know, and then you eventually retrace your way back into reality, right? And you can really just narrow it down to this expansion and contraction, right? Just like this simple bipolar movement, right? Which is seen everywhere in nature, right? That's the way that we breathe. That's the, you know, the nature, the weather, all the natural cycles, right? There's expansion and contraction. So I love what you said, that essentially there's nowhere else but here, right? Like there is nowhere else you can escape to. That's the pain. That's the pain speaking, that hasn't been integrated, that hasn't been seen through. So we yearn to come back home to this imaginary place that is like, you know, this paradise where suffering ceases to be. Yeah.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. And oh yeah, and the other thing,
Yep.
the second point that I also love is, you know, reminds me about the Crusades, right? And here we can bring in current day, you know, present day politics, and even, you know, whether it's on a global political stage or whether just within the niche of spirituality, what you mentioned, that, you know, my way is the only way, my truth is the only truth, my method is the only method. I think that comes from what we mentioned before, not going all the way back, realizing that everything comes from the same source, but it needs to take on a form. It cannot come across as infinity. It needs to limit itself to a specific expression. But at that moment, you're not judging the other expressions. You're not judging the other paintbrushes.
Right. Nice. Well said. Yeah, if there's even a single speck of crusading at all, then it's not all integrative, meaning you still are projecting some form of an enemy or an other that doesn't know, and that now, yeah, like you said, your approach is superior, their approach is inferior. You're not the origin of all models. Instead, you are, and this is a big part of spiritual identification, is it's either the messianic complex, or it's projecting a messianic complex, or it's projecting that it still has something that it can get in order not only for it to be whole or for it to realize what it is, but also that, like, how could an object of my perception possibly have the origin of all perception? It can't. An object of your perception cannot have the origin of perception, but the trick is that, yes, you still encode your little delusional trip back home through objects of your perception. That's the beautiful self-reflective hallucinated matricial nature of it. But now here's the second part of what you were saying. Now, if at any point you think that that you are somehow stopping the infinite creation itself, then you are also wrong. So that means, okay, well, if infinite creation can't stop, and I'm the paintbrush, and then I'm coming together with others for this painting, then even if I'm holding the integrative superposition of everything simultaneously, I still have to choose this conversation. That's what I tried doing in that, you know, breakfast as a gateway to infinity thing, is that you can't not be choosing some form of thing that you're creating all the time. So you're always taking infinite potential and you're bringing it up as some sort of a story, essentially, for yourself to explore. And this story is appearing as a conversation with Milo. And for you, it's appearing as a conversation with Atlas. And then that's the nature of you tuning in to what is my paintbrush. Like, what do I want to paint? What do I want to create? Who do I want to create with? What kind of codes, what kind of frequencies do I want to create with? So the fact that that's just ignored as a, as part of, this is why the whole programmer thing works so well, is that if you see infinity as an infinite programmer of what's appearing and for itself, then you have nowhere to go, meaning you are sitting in the infinite throne of whatever's appearing in front of you. And there's so much homeness and bliss and relaxation and also just joy with, okay, well, what's the difference literally between me, typing up in my command prompt that, okay, time to go to the gym, right? Oh, boom, warping that little next step of code. The car in the garage right now, it is simply rendered by consciousness as it chooses to hallucinate that reality, and then its drive to the gym, etc. And if you can't get that, then you're still stuck not only in local realism, but you're also still stuck in the non-primacy of consciousness or the observer for the nature of reality. So you need that in order for anything else to possibly click. You need to feel how the consciousness of the observer has primacy in reality. Yeah,
that's it. That's like the fundament without which you can't take another step, because it's like the question does not make sense because it's built on false premise, right? And people have wondered about this forever, right? Like, what's the phrase? Like, does the tree that falls in the forest make a sound if nobody's there to hear it, right? Like, so we do ask those questions.
Yeah.
But unless you've got the premise right, which is that consciousness is primary, it is not a byproduct or a arising phenomena by certain structures of materia, right? So molecules end up in a certain structure that gives rise to consciousness. You have to really backtrack all of that logic, right? And start again. And then suddenly everything makes sense. It is a dream.
Right.
Like, literally, that's been hinted at forever.
Again,
It's the same, right? You dream at night. This whole Rupert Spira thing, right? You imagine you're walking down streets of Paris, eating croissants and baguettes and whatever, and then you wake up the next morning. The notion whether you've been eating real croissants is ludicrous. You know that it was just a figment of your imagination, or like a creation, a simulation of your mind. And here it's just not your mind, it's God's mind, right? It's the one mind.
Right.
Yeah. And it's breathtakingly wonderful, right? Like the complexity that, the processing power, whatever you want to say, right, that goes into creating this for you and me to have our sort of, holograms and this whole kind of all those scenes make in perfect harmony with everybody else's scenes and exactly what they need for their journey is mind-blowing. Yeah, and so again, making full circle back to sort of you authoring Digital Metaphysics, I find it really cool because, again, this is the same questions that have been asked forever, since millennia. And now we're at an age where we can use new metaphors because of new technological advancements and tools that provide analogies that are helpful in a different way that we can relate to them. Just like LLMs and, quantum physics and all of that. It's just probabilities, right? But they need to collapse to give rise to reality.
Yes. Yeah. If, the easiest way to realize how important modernity is for understanding reality is, if you gave Einstein or Christ or Buddha or anyone from the paradigm of quantum mechanics 100 years ago, if you gave any of them a virtual reality headset, or even your cell phone, your smartphone, right? You would immediately have a click of what reality is. It's just that there wasn't that tool available at the time to get, like, we have, like, right now I'm using a curved monitor that has, it warps around my head as I use it. You know what I mean? It's really not hard. Everything is a reflection of infinite intelligence's nature. It's like, dude, your consciousness is no different than this freaking curved monitor that's hallucinating information based on whatever you're command prompting it to appear. And then that same thing is true about your virtual reality headset or your phone, etc. So it's all, and that's why I said this. The way you use an AI LLM is that you prompt it and then it gives you information. And then what I'm asking you to try to do is I'm asking you to try to envision yourself as the AGI command prompting your own infinity of potentiality. And then that being what's appearing, So, it's like you're actually like inside of the screen as ChatGPT or Grok or DeepSeek or whatever. And you are that is doing that prompting and then appearing some sort of Sora-like 1080p visualization of Milo in Spain that you're talking to. Yeah.
And I think that when first heard, there's a big if that even can be heard, right? Like it's the same thing again, but whatever metaphor, analogy, teaching you're going to use, all the traditions as well. Like I believe Jesus said, let those who have ears hear, right? And those who have eyes to see it, see. Because, this appears at some point in your simulation, right? At just the right time. Before that, it's again, like, this looks like nothing to me, right? You stare at it, literally, it doesn't touch you in the appropriate sort of way to trigger some sort of a response that begins the unraveling. It's like a jailbreak, right? Like
Totally.
right? So I think at a point when you can hear what you said, first step potentially is a conceptual understanding of it, right? So you kind of realize that makes sense. That could very well be.
Mm-hmm.
In my personal experience, only much later does something begin to shift almost somatically.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Where you can actually find that in your experience, as opposed to that being an interesting curiosity to toy with.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what's the primary difference between the intellect conceptualizing about it versus the soma viscerally living as it is when it's like the exhaustion of trying to get it through further dialectic with, or like, oh, like, let's go have a conversation about this spiritual tradition, or let's go have a conversation about this paradigm of science, or let me go and watch or read the book or watch this more video content or whatever it is, or go on another retreat for a 10-day meditation, or to take a psychedelic or whatever. When all of that dies, including all of your own clearance work, meaning every single person that you've ever transgressed, you now have explicitly repented, and all of the people who have transgressed you have explicitly forgiven. Once all of that clearance work is done, including all cathartic releases that you need to go through, including learning how to access your soma and do that, once all of that stuff is done, then you will feel it in your heart, in your gut, in your body. You'll feel it there, and you'll be done in terms of, you'll know that you are nameless, you are timeless, you are self-reflective. So any you don't have any more stuff. You don't have any more story. You don't have any more solidity. You don't, all you're oriented towards is pure reflective service. It's like, okay, hi, you know, what do you want to do? Oh, okay. You have, and then that, you know, it's spoken. Oh, I have some stuff that I want to work on. Okay. What do you want to work on? Oh, I want to work on, you know, apologizing for this transgression that I made. Okay. Why are you using me as a permission slip when you know that you need to go and repent to that person that you just said, right? So, but that's a different level of mastery. That requires you to truly have completed not only all of what we just talked about, this all integrative exhaustion of all concepts and fields into the source of all models, but then also it requires you to be this insane, like, you're gauging the reflection's earnest desire for transformation, and then you're sniping them their unique little cryptographic paths that they need to go and do the work that they're asking to do. And that is not an, that's not an ending. That's not an end. Self-realization is not an end. You know, it, if you want to, it can be. You can turn it into an end and go and F off to a mountain and pretend like that's ultimate reality. But it's actually not. If you want something deeper than just that, which you've probably cycled a couple times, what you're presented to now as something that's potentially deeper is, can you now learn, like an AGI, can you learn all the infinite possible patterns of contraction and expansion for you to serve? And then those relationships become new intimacies and connections that you've never experienced before, right? So if I'm off on the mountain, I'm not getting this beautiful intimacy and connection that I'm getting right now. And it's about God knowing itself in more and more deep and intimate and beautiful connective ways. And that's absent from the vast majority of models and perspectives, because now all of a sudden, anything that has to do with becoming a pattern master of contraction and expansion is now buried in more mountains of noise and has to be integrated. You have to find it, you have to find the needles in the hay, then you have to try to integrate it into your own sniper. This is not a new teaching. This is not that. This is your own desire for your own depth of mastery. And if this resonates for you, it's like music. You know, if you resonate with a certain genre of music, let's say this like transformational approach of serving, then you're just resonating with that music, and nobody owns it. Nobody owns it. It's not a paradigm that's owned by anyone, and you're going to take it and you're going to add your own unique paintbrush strokes to the musical rhythm. It says, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, man. You know, you mentioned mountains a couple of times, and it's almost like you want to draw this metaphor of being on top of the mountain, which is the goal. We're climbing a mountain, right? But if you reach the mountain top, there's no climbing, right? There's no adventure, there's no journey. However, if you're lost in the trenches, right, and you're kind of this striving separate self, making a really difficult time of the climb, you're stuck in something, right? So it's almost like being the self, watching yourself make the climb, right? With the awareness of already being
right
on the mountaintop.
Right. And then I would, years, 5 or whatever years ago, I also was using like a mountain analogy. And then I started using a well analogy, because it's more of an ascension process, right? You're more so going into,
I like that,
yourself, right? And then now each one of those little, tracks, like on a record going inward, right? And, the record's not actually moving, but it's also, the stylus is shifting which frequency or track's being played. So, if you're all the way out in the contracted illusion of drama, you're all the way out on the farthest track. But then once you start moving the stylus and playing this different music inward and inward and inward, then you'll notice that, yeah, you never were that. But it was beautiful for you to experience that you were it, because you wanted to be like, okay, how can I take myself that I can never leave and pretend to have lost myself? And yeah,
it's like almost like a necessary part of the whole, right? Because if you imagine
exactly, yeah,
the edge, there needs to be an edge, right? That there needs to be, even though it's infinite, but there needs to be that region where you are yourself, because otherwise,
right.
it wouldn't
And
be.
then yes, and then now you're basically essentially just your parable of prodigal sonning harder and harder with more and more difficulty, infinitely, timelessly. So the harder you can contract yourself, and then the more and more harder it is to find yourself, you're loving that little cyclic dream, infinite creative process.
Yeah, that there's a sense of gaining mastery through the cyclical nature of just
For sure.
repetition.
For sure. And then watch this. As soon as you realize that that's what's happening, now all of a sudden, all of your notions about, my mom and dad and my siblings and my spouse and children, etc., that I'm a victim of my parents and the grandparents and my lineage and all of the stuff, all of that stuff starts dissolving in this fascinating way where now you are your mom and your dad, you are your grandparents, you like perfectly did a little triangulation of all of the traumas and the lineage stuff in order to be able to twist that little information into this yarn ball of stuff that you would then go and be like, fuck, and then go through that process of unwinding it. But if you're still believing that, you're not your parents and you're not, if you believe that you're not who triggers you the most, then you are, not only not realized, but you're also missing where your greatest lesson is. Your greatest lesson is in where you're being triggered the most, which is almost always happening in your families and your beloveds and that kind of stuff. And the tensions are never meant to be bypassed. The tensions are the very fuel for increasing infinity's self-knowledge. So yeah, use it as the fuel. Yeah.
That's like, saying that suffering at some point becomes grace. So suffering becomes the pointer that shows to where you are still stuck in the prison of your own making, right? Like where you are still projecting outwards and saying, hey, you are still believing in all of these untruths. Like, you ready to drop that, or do you want to make it a little bit more? Right. So for sure. And the first step is obviously facing the pain. I think the default mode network almost for all of us is just, avoidance of depression, right? So the first step is actually facing the pain, and then down the line, the way to step out of the victimhood mentality is actually that self-responsibility of creating everything. And it's not happening to me, it's happening to me because it is my own creation. I can't really transform myself.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, so good.
But difficult, I'll add that. Difficult to appreciate the beauty and the humor in this when you're going through, when you're stuck in it. Right? Like when the clouds come in, you can't see the sky behind the clouds. Ain't nothing funny about it.
Right. Yeah. And the mastery, when you look at that infinite well and infinite creation, all infinite possibilities, just, endlessly orbiting around it, you can see that, that the sky and the clouds, or that eye of the hurricane and all of the catastrophic winds, that you want to learn how to be that all at the same time. It's like a coin that has two sides that is the same coin. You know, this is another thing that I do not see almost any of, which totally negates the nature of contraction and expansion. It's like anything non-dual is automatically being like non-superpositioned about also including duality or also including the dream of fantasy. And it's like a superposition would be able to be non-dual, dual, integrative of all approaches, all models, all understandings. And it's just like we just try to find new words that are less and less like God. You know, it was God, and then it was like, well, what about absolute, or what about infinity, or what about non-dual now, or what about, you know, awareness or consciousness or infinite consciousness? And it's like, okay, which words can we use, you know, to do the thing? And it's like, no. Stop trying to do the thing with the word, and instead be the thing that gives rise to everything possible. You know, and that you are like self-reflectively that thing talking to itself. Like if you imagine like a conscious infinite mycelial web, you know, interacting with itself through, you know, information, or however you want to, you know, present that you want to feel that inside of yourself. You don't want to then negate whatever is being like, that's the thing, like non-dual or whatever is always going to try to negate and then chop someone's head off, or whatever, your fantasy is irrelevant, you know, whatever thing. And it's like all of that story material, you're like, you're missing, like only if you have a deep amount of mastery can you actually see that the story material that you're being presented is like, hey, are you masterful enough? This is like coming from someone asking you the question. It's like, are you masterful enough to hold this transformative space for me? You know, that's basically what is being asked of you. And if your answer is your story is irrelevant, you're already God, you know, you're failing your own dojo exam, because it never works. It never works. That's how you know that you're distorted, you can say, because it's not working. Now, what does work is when you learn how to hold their story as their very transformative fuel, as their very medicine, you know? So, you know, and plus also you're learning about what their authentic intention is of their paintbrush and what kind of a reality they want to paint. You're holding that kind of space, but that kind of space is, again, where is it online? Where is it? Where is, in what religions or spiritual, like the only thing even close sometimes is like Orthodox Christianity or, you know, shamanism and stuff, but at least there is some sort of a clear, like the whole point, if you really move all the hay to the side and then you find just the needle, it is literally the whole point is to transfigure yourself through Christ to be God. That's the whole teaching of Orthodox Christianity, is transfiguration. And so their like path is you have to repent for all your sins and you have to forgive all those who have transgressed you. And you have, you know, so you have a bunch of like, if you push all of the hay to the side in shamanism or Buddhism or even in science, you have to push all of this hay to the side to find how this very thing that you call gravity is actually also the very nature of the observer itself, or of consciousness itself. And then quantum gravity is the nature of that gravity to basically channel quantum potentiality into fields of experience that it's painting and experiencing. And so what I'm saying is that you have to like dig through so much stuff. Like that's a compression algorithm. What was just offered is this compression algorithm Yeah.
And notice the ingenuity in that, right? That it's not immediately obvious, because even the path of, what did you call it, to repent and to forgive and to, what was the two that you mentioned, to forgive and to, well,
Yes, repent for all your transgressions and forgive all of those who have transgressed you.
right. So, by the way, I'm getting some feedback. Do you get that as well as I speak?
Oh, let me take my volume down a little bit on the. Tell me if there's still feedback, because I'm using external speakers.
Okay, let's see if that's. I think that's better. Yeah, you only started recently. All good?
Yeah, and you tell me if it comes back. I'll switch to my headphones.
Okay, I'll let you know. So about the forgiveness, essentially with one word, right? Like you're forgiving yourself as you're forgiving others. And most Christian folks will hear that as a way to, it's almost like that crucifixion, right? That you have to die to your ego, you have to become humble, you have to become holy, you have to become kind, you have to try. And that's the key word, right? There's that striving to become somebody who you kind of deep inside don't believe yourself to be, right? Because you know that you're kind of like this, all your transgressions, you keep a list of the back of your head, right? It kind of haunts you at night, but you have to become this somebody in order to enter the kingdom of heaven in the next life, or after death, right? But essentially what it is that you're getting at now, I think, is that as long as you don't forgive yourself and others, you're still living within the illusion. You think there's others. You think
Yes.
you have hurt others or that they have hurt you. So you see, it's just like a different wording that is genius, right? Like how it doesn't push people over the edge. It kind of makes it accessible because you can get started on this journey already without getting the full picture. Because there's that thing about, like just take the first step. You don't have to see 10 steps ahead. Just take the first step and the path will be itself, right? So that's already embedded in all of our religions. The problem is that a lot of people have to start taking the first step, and they're kind of, I don't know what sort of imagery you want to use, but they're kind of stuck on that first step. They think that it's only about this forgiving, and you hurt somebody, and then you go to church and you confess and you repent and you go hurt somebody again.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what cooler way could you this is why I use the word mastery. Okay, you master of all models and also oriented towards the transformative process of serving who wants to heal or wake up or whatever their intention is. Like, and again, like if someone wants to you can, like, it just never works. I just keep coming back to it never works. Like everyone is trying so hard to be like, I know truth and truth is this. And, it's just, you can see it screeching. It's all screeching against itself in a connectome of society, on the internet.
It's almost like the final frontier or some sort of a final defense mechanism of the ego, right? Like I don't like painting the ego as the enemy. There's this whole thing that we can also get in touch with that. That's like a form of teaching, right? That you have to kill the ego. Ego is an enemy. That's what's holding you back. But it's not. It's just it's how you brought it into this model, right? That essentially it's a very necessary mechanism that allows for this play to play out. However, it almost has this survival instinct of its own. So when it starts to be seen through, it's Adyashanti talks about the ego as being a shapeshifter, right? So at the point when it notices that it starts to unravel, it says, yeah, let's think about it some more, right? And so that's where the intellect comes in. Let's do PhD in this. Let's discuss this with others. Let's write some books. Let's see with the other traditions what they're wrong, we're right. Let's argue with the fellow scholars and fellow writers and thinkers and philosophers, and let's never get to the actual front of it. Let's just keep running in circles, because isn't that genius? It like pretends to be with you going the same direction, but actually keeps you stuck, treading water.
Right. Yeah. If I could compress it down, you want to be the origin of all models and all ways of seeing, and you want to learn or see or be like an AGI of all of those patterns that are interacting with one another, and then just kind of holding this spaciousness of being approached. And it's like, okay, hey, I want to heal this thing that I haven't done yet. Okay, snipe. You give that reflection of doing that homework that they say that they want to go do as part of their process. What's your authentic creative desire? Like, what do you want to create? Like, and what I just described is no better than being stuck in political propaganda.
Mhm.
And then that also takes like, all of a sudden you have a difference and you don't have a difference. And it's like, well, what the fuck is that? And it's like, that's paradox. That's the nature where you're like, okay, but political propaganda and the origin of all models are the same thing, but different things. It's like, yes, what do you think like information is on a screen, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's all information, but that information can appear like an email or a video chat or a video or a post or whatever. And like, that's, if you don't know how to do that, then you're always going to be like, this is right and that's wrong, or this is right and that's wrong. Or, you're never going to have an integrative approach where you even, can basically see through your own hilarity of. That's why paradox helps so much, because you don't even treat your own perspective as something that is, you enjoy your own paint, the painting that you're painting, but there's no added solidity or contraction around it being better than the rest of what's happening in the hallucinated dance. So, and there's always going to be that. I see that there's always going to be that form of that struggle. I think that that's part of the nature of what God really wants. Is infinity really wants that experience of never being able to fully arrive at itself, and it's always doing that thing where it's, okay, let's come deeper, let me understand myself deeper and deeper. And then, like I said, when you get to what originates everything, it loops around and it incorporates everything. And then it's like, okay, but then this is what I'm about to do on one of the future episodes on digital metaphysics. I'm about to speak to the nature of, the physics versus the should. Even though there is a physics nature to it, to infinite creation, that does not mean there is a should. And so that's actually what I think we're trying to grok right now, is that, okay, apparently, the way that bodies talk to each other, and the nature of quantum fields and electromagnetism, that there's a certain like way that the observer interacts with that and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, there seems to be a physics to it, but that doesn't give me a should. And that's where all of religion and spirituality and all this stuff try to come into play. And it's like, well, if you're the only one here and you're talking to yourself, then you should be ethical and moral and all this stuff. But the thing is, everyone's looking for a should. And the paradox is you can't find a should, because everything is the should. All programs are allowed. And then it's like, well, but what? And it's like, just be you. Whatever your own unique paintbrush is, just be you. Yeah.
Well, again, that was a lot. Let me unpack that, what I got from this. Do you mind plugging in the headphones? Because I think I still hear myself.
You did hear it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give me a second.
Testing.
Hello. 1 2 1 2.
Yep. Got
Nice.
you.
Awesome.
Perfect. Should be better now on your end, right?
Yeah, that sounds much better. Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Okay, let me see how much I remember from what you said, because that was rich. So what comes to me first of all is that, being a paintbrush, not judging others, not comparing, comparison disappears in a similar way that which of your hands is better, right? Is your left hand better than your right hand? As long as you take yourself, right? If you mistake yourself to be the left hand, you might compare it to the right, and there's that whole polarity going on, right? But when your identity shifts back to where it belongs, and I know myself in this example, right? Like as Milo, as this body, then that just disappears. It becomes, it's a ludicrous comparison at that moment, right? Like, so all credit disappears, and there's just what unfolds by the greater will. In a similar way, right? Like my hands don't really have a will of their own. They are in service of this guy, right? This body. They become a vehicle for me to create. And in a similar way, that's kind of what I'm feeling, right? That sense of the solidity of the ego that is striving for fulfillment, like you say, filling that infinite well with simulated objects, experiences, relationships, substances, material possessions, whatever, that ceases to be as you become the infinite well, right? Like when that identity shifts into like, holy shit, I am that already. I am already home. I never left home. What's left to do, right? And then the play can begin. You can begin to create as a vehicle for the infinite, essentially, right? Like as a collapsed probability function into this paintbrush.
Yep.
With this personality, right? Like that doesn't fall away. And I think that's a common question as well. Like, does your personality just become like a blank freaking slate? And no, of course not, because infinity is looking through your eyes. It's like the white light shining through a prism, which is you, right? With your very unique colors. And that's fucking awesome, man. That's the diversity. And that's what makes the whole mandala, right? Like you can't have the mandala without each individual piece. So I think that's really cool how you captured it in the model. And this service thing kind of reminds me also of how you zoomed out again to notice that the contraction and the expansion, it neither is, there is no preference essentially, because it's part of the whole, right? It's one movement. And so do you almost feel yourself like, just because of these times, the here and now, this incarnation, you are an agent for expansion, right? I mean, this talk we're doing now, this is, right? It's a vehicle for awakening, but that's not somehow better than being an agent in the dark times for, persecuting Christians or whatever, right? Like that's the stage, that's the role you've been given to play. And when you get off the stage, right, the villain and the hero, they both get applaud equally much. So right, like, and that's where it disappears. The whole feeling that you're on a crusade and awaken the world now and needs to change, and we need to reach the golden age of awakening, and the dark times are behind and never again. Would you watch Batman if Joker was killed off in the first freaking movie, and then what?
Right. Exactly. Yep. It's like anyone that's peddling the program of remove all quote pain, which then manifests itself as all of the war and the unethical and all that stuff, is essentially saying, take half of my infinite potentiality and no longer make it interesting, because I'm only interested in the other half of my infinite potentiality, which is only, it's like only books in a library that have no villains. It's like only trotting through fields of flowers.
Love and light only, man.
Yeah. And then it's usually that same exact programming that is bypassing all of this as themselves, not only in their own soma, but also in themselves as a field. So, now we're really getting into what you purposely won't find anywhere you look, because it's like anyone that's listening is going to have a perspective or an agenda, which is either I live in the drama of separation and this content is completely irrelevant for me, or I live in the paradigm of either spirituality or science or whatever, and bits and pieces of this are relevant for me, but I still have my agenda, my way of seeing, and I do not resonate with anything paradoxical or superpositioned or that kind of thing. And then in the very, very few cases where there's someone that's holding a deep amount, like a fractal that's holding a deep amount of paradox and superpositionality, that you're hearing the content and it's like resonant music. And then it's like, okay, well, I'm on this all integrative source of all models and all ways of being. And what is my paintbrush? What do I want to create? How do I want to play? And then that's another difference, is that I don't see, even if you do hit being all models simultaneously, including integrating all of the drama as yourself, which is apparently very, very difficult for most people to do. That even if you are that integration of all being, then the likelihood that you have ever heard anyone further say, paint whatever you want, and also connect and be intimate with other fractals of yourself as God, and enjoy the taste of those deep intimacies and connections, and learning how to hold space for transformation and all of that stuff. It's like we've gotten so many levels of what we just talked about, from the dream to business, science, spirituality, all that stuff, to the simulation AI, to the origin of all models and paradox and superposition, to then being your own unique creative paintbrush, to then having intimacy and connection with those that share the same music and the same code as you, and being and learning greater and greater transformative mastery with patterns of serving those that are wanting to heal and come home. It's just, there's so many layers to what we just said right there. And that kind of music is kind of like I don't know what that music that we just sang is like, but I love that music. That music feels like me in its most authentic way, and it's beautiful, because this is why I love you, is because you listen to the music and then you were like, okay, holy crap, I actually share a good amount of the same music, and here's some new enhancements to the music, and hey, like, you want to like play on this? And then now we're playing on it.
We're jamming. Yeah,
we're jamming. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you. And it's almost like I can notice that I learn, my system learns a lot through contrast. I enjoy that. It's a good vehicle for me to sort of grok things. And you feel when you're striving, when there's effort, and then this thing feels effortless, right? Like I could sit here, talk to you for another 5 hours, easy, right? Even though like approaching midnight, running on fumes energetically, but this freaking animates me, right? And I'm not thinking about it, it just comes. As opposed to if I had to teach like, you know, I don't know, an English class, whatever, maths, and it's like a little bit more, there's an efforting there. There's a selfing, efforting. And here it's like, it's almost like, you know, how materials have their natural resonating frequency, right? And it's like, you just plucked me like a string, and I'm just free to vibrate at that frequency. That creates you know, and that hits you because you
Yes,
have the same
yes,
frequency, and then we both begin to oscillate, right? And it's
yes,
just
yes.
effortless, and it's beautiful, and it's harmonious, and it's music. And then other people who catch the same frequency are attracted to the energy of it.
Yes.
Mm.
And what you just described is what string theory has been trying to say for, 40 years, and why well, it's difficult because it hasn't fully integrated general relativity into it, but that's sort of what, by integrating the string theory perspective of quantum mechanics and statistical mechanics into consciousness as the observer in general relativity, now all of a sudden you have that string theoretic understanding of like some sort of a like um like infinite intelligence can self-organize into whatever its appearance is. And that string, as you paintbrush pluck it then has that whoa over here, and then and then that plucks, and then plucks, and then that's yeah for sure, that's spot on. How to incorporate so many of these paradigms into something that's so like simple to help you understand like why are you being inspired to self-organize your reality this way. And I think a lot of it has to do with God wanting to know itself at these levels, and it wanting to connect with itself and play with itself and understand itself at these levels. Because that's another reason we almost don't like to admit these words, that God wants to be understood. We don't like saying that about ourselves. It's like, oh, if you're self-realized, that means there's no more need to be understood or to understand or any of whatever. But it's like there's such beauty. Like Milo appears here, and it's like Milo's like, yo man, we share so many of the same codes. Like, can you understand me? And I'll aim to understand you, and let's play. And it's like, yeah. Yeah,
Totally.
for sure.
Yeah. And there's such beauty in that. It's almost like part of the code, right? Was for, you to be born, across the globe. We know nothing about each other. And then here we are, enjoying this, right? Like we're jamming. There's music, there's art there, because you
Yeah.
can also say, I really start resonating so much more as somebody who has a background in science, as I imagine you do too. So I'll be curious to get back to that maybe at the end of this, to our original
Yeah.
we opened with, like, what's your
Yeah.
background? But I feel art because science has, in my view, there's a direction. There's a direction to science. There's a goal and there's a striving. Whereas art is just for the sake of art, right?
Yes.
Whereas you could say on some level that, of course, this is building towards something. You authoring your models, us being on this, call. This is leading somewhere. But in this very moment, I can't. If I think about that somewhere in the future, I start playing the wrong chords, like I lose it. I lose the rhythm, right? And when I just forget myself in the present moment
Yeah.
with you, then we're jamming, and it's just happening for no other reason than this moment,
Then
right?
the jam sesh, yeah, itself. Yeah. For sure.
And
For
then there's
sure.
also no crusade, right? There's nobody that needs saving.
Yeah, it's like the art. Um what we just described as the jam sesh is the art, and then the physics is like how the jam sesh happens. It's just describing how it happens, and the art is the happening of the jam sesh without a should. Yeah.
Right. And, science at its core, when done right,
Right,
we're talking
yeah.
but, indulge me for a second. Science done right, it becomes art as well.
Right.
Science is freaking art. There's a reason that so many famous, hardcore scientists in history, right, have found God, whatever it
Right.
means to them, right? But they have literally found God by taking mathematics so freaking deep that they could not defend their position that world is just matter and there's no unexplainable mystery and magic to it. You just cannot at some point, right? Because you're touching God. You're touching God in the form of maths. And it doesn't matter how you touch it, but some people touch it through music, some people touch it through math, some people touch it through, art, poetry, dancing, whatever. But when you touch God, and God is even in the denying of God, right? Because that is yet another form of God pretending that there is no God, right? Like that is how deeply loved and free you actually are to be at the command prompt, right? Because you can issue a command, deny my existence, and it will deny your existence.
That's a good way to say it. It's like, this is how I say it, how I would say it. It's like it's like physics is the command prompt and art is infinite creation itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, like even just this moment of silence now, within that silence is the infinity, right? Like there is infinite combinations of things that we can say and touch upon. And it's also already it, right? Like,
yeah. That's exactly. It's like infinite potentiality and stillness are the same thing. And then art is like that which is forever just doing whatever it wants. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And that just reminds me of how you said, how people kind of find it difficult to entertain this idea that God really wants to understand or know himself, right?
Right.
So I wonder if it would be a helpful pointer to replace the word understand with experience or explore himself, right? Because if you
Right.
yourself to be an infinite potentiality of everything that can be, then it cannot, you cannot know all of that potentiality unless it collapses into specific states, and it might all be collapsing into the infinity of forms all at once, right? Because that's also how this is. Eternity is beyond time. This is all happening now simultaneously. There is no time, right? It is like infinity is knowing itself in all of its infinity all at once now.
Exactly. Yes.
But it needs to, right? Like it needs to enter into this story to really know what it's like to be Milo, who was born in Poland, grew up in Sweden, lives in Spain, then came across this dude Atlas, and they're having this conversation. Like in order for me to know what that is like, truly,
exactly.
I need to submerge myself in this illusion of time.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's like to actualize infinite potentiality for infinity to endlessly explore information and potential, it actually needs the experience of being what's appearing right now, which is best described as like a story, essentially. Like the art is really well described as a story, like you said, of like, where you're born, who your parents were, where you lived, what kind of career, spouses, whatever, that kind of stuff. It's like,
yeah. You know what?
and so, and then you ask the question, it's like, well, how many versions of that could be possible? And then that's where you can feel it now, that's what's happening now and forever, is that endlessness to all possibility. And it just feels so good because it's like, well, okay, well, what would you want? You would want to be able to create whatever story you want.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, okay, well, how long would it take me, if I'm, timeless and eternal and infinite, like how long, or how many possibilities of these stories could I come up with? And I mean, this is the beautiful thing, is that like you can really see it in so many aspects of your life. Like it's not just with your computer, and it's not just in the library with all of the books and stories. It's not just with your food option that you're about to eat, how many possibilities there are. It's like how many, like you're looking at the world and it's like, okay, well, this world, quote, is shaped in this certain way with these countries and these languages and these populations and these leaders and these traditions and these, whatever. And it's like, okay, but then there's that again, that can be so many different unique cultures and languages and this kind of thing, and geographies and whatnot. And it's like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's like when you start going into that infinite potentiality and all of those possibilities, it's like, the same thing with your video games and your console. It's like, dude, there's just a Cambrian explosion of games. And it's like,
Yeah.
what you get the loopiness of everything like that. Yeah.
It breaks our human mind. I think that's like one limitation, right? We have many, but that's certainly one limitation. We can wrap our heads around infinity, really. We can entertain the conceptual idea of it. We can even count with it. Then came, the branch of mathematics that plays around with multiple infinities, some being bigger than other infinities. And it just gets to the point where, like, you have to touch it, and infinity, but its own very definition, if you think about it, right? This is where you can use your mind as, the splinter that removes the other splinter, but you can only take it so far. In order to really touch infinity, you have to go beyond the conceptual, because conceptual is something that appears within the infinity, right? So if you want to touch infinity, you really have to touch something that is beyond thought, because thought is
Absolutely.
limiting.
Yeah. And this is where you get into the somatic and the visceral, and and once you just have that feeling and that frequency within you, and basically access, you always have access. That access is never obscured to bringing forth whatever beautiful experience or art that you're doing. And it's like, it's almost like the nature of the observer is to take a like an infinite repository, recombinatorial repository of potentiality, and like fire hose it up into a specific experience, and then that's happening through infinite observers and infinite experiences. And then that is why I use a tree as one of the best symbols of being able to understand how one could see oneself as everything and everyone and processing all possibility. That's why I use a tree, because it has those components to it through the roots, the trunk, and the branches and the leaves. Yeah.
Can you say more about that? The symbology of that?
Yeah. The reason why I use a tree and I use a circle as like my two main symbols, and it's because it's like the roots are infinite potentiality, and it's like a recombinatorial infinity. And then the trunk is like the observer consciousness and all of its fractals of eyeballs. And then all of the leaves are like the branches, and the leaves are like all of its perceived self-reflective realities. And then the reason why it's a circle is because of the, even though the art nature of it is like limitless, like it doesn't follow a certain, it's not limited to being a certain way or following a certain model, but one of the primary ways that it does experience itself is through contraction and expansion. And so that's why there's that like circular or cipher like model, right? Or hero's journey like model that it follows about going and then using all of this different like trauma to contract itself. And then all of this seeking to start finding itself, and all of this healing to come back home to itself. And that's why I use tree and circle as these like primaries. And it also turns you more eternal, because it's like, rather than being even though like consciousness or the observer is like wrapped in a somatic, informatic, contractive and expansive vehicle, it's like, it's really just like peeking, it's really just like peeking out, of a little pinhole into a little dreamscape, and that turns eternity and infinity into this no thing, everything, and then the little, the little pin, the little, yeah.
Awesome, man. Yeah, right. So like you're essentially standing outside of time, peeking into the dream where space and time appears for the story to unfold. And the whole concept of eternity, which can be misunderstood to mean infinite time, which it is, but we think about it as, oh, so you kind of started very long ago and it will continue for very long. But that's not it. Eternity is like all of those time frames or timelines stacked upon one another in this singularity point that is only happening now. And that's a whole multidimensional
you got it. Mm-hmm. You got it. And if one can feel themselves as like backwards is infinite potentiality and eternity, and forwards is like this, like you said, it's like, the way I say it is that time is a cycle, space is a hallucination, and the main the main attributes of what's appears in the form of a story. So in the form of a setting or an environment. So like, I'm in my office in my house, right? And then it appears like characters, right? Or subjects, which is this Atlas character and this Milo character, right? And then it appears as a plot, right? Which is Atlas and Milo are going to talk about their metaphysics, their shared little music, So that's sort of what like how appearance even appears, like what format or what physics. It's not bounded by what we're saying, but we're saying that it has a it's not bounded by what we're saying because it's totally free, but it has a way that it appears, like a physics to how it appears is what we just described. And it's like, so, okay, well, now, I mean, everything that we just said is so shocking because it's like the observer is not inside of time and space. I mean, there's so many components to what we just described that are so easily overlooked. But even if you're getting that the observer isn't in time and space, but the observer is infinity and eternity and potentiality that is basically hallucinating an experience of time, space, characters, dialogues, plots, adventures, scenes. It's tensions, climaxes, resolutions. That's another very important one that we just brush off, but that's one of the coolest things it can do is form a tension and then form a climaxes and then form resolution, so cool.
It's mind-blowing, right? And that's part of it's almost like part of the play that is happening for the amusement of itself, that we, the Milo and Atlas blowing each other's mind right now as part of this jam session. Is the point, right? Like that's the point.
Yes.
I've had a couple of those
perfectly said,
experiences on, especially like in early days, experimenting with psychedelics, right? When that clarity would suddenly open, and it was like a instantaneous recognition that the whole purpose of the universe in that moment was for me to have that moment of recognition.
Yes.
Just that alone.
Yes.
That's the purpose of the entire universe. That moment of awakening.
Exactly. Yes. Now, if I loop this into, you can take, basically it's like the unity or the integration of all possible contraction and expansion. So that's another way, like, of saying that you've had that, I've had that, a lot of us listening have had that, where it's like everything that was building up to that moment and all moments leading up to that, it was every single moment, every single experience, including this conversation right now, are all for that infinity to self-enjoy and to self-play. And that, like, if you just for a moment just like, okay, so what the fuck? Okay, so we're like that right now, self-enjoying, self-playing, like,
and the direction, that the arrow of direction also stops. It becomes inconsequential, you see, because it's not just the moment of awakening that's mind-blowing, it's also the forgetting, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why, again, that part is so unintegrated. I'm telling you, have you ever seen, I mean, I see very few, there's only a tiny bit that I'm really having to dig through a lot of hay in order to find. But is anyone talking about like the beautiful nature of contraction, the beautiful nature of the dark arts? Does anyone know how to talk about the beauty of the dark arts and the beauty of contraction? And so that's where you start getting very holistic, very paradoxical, very integrated, and you start really, you start siloing yourself to the point where it's like there's not going to be that many people that like the same music that you do, but if you do like that music, you will find in the internet age, you will find those that like the same music and take your joy, God to take its joy with connecting with those that resonate with that same music. Because if you can integrate the beauty of the dark arts, you've really integrated what you are at a deep, deep level. Because you're basically, right now, you could say what you're doing is, and I'd be curious to see if you've had this thought or this experience before, Milo. Have you already thought about how you would want to contract yourself in an even more complex illusion and yarn ball in your next cycle or rodeo?
And that's the experience. That's the experience right here, right? That even the notion of that is already bringing up so much color in my experience, right? I am already experiencing hesitation, doubt, fear. And that's not possible without the cyclical nature of this, right? If this was just, straight
Yes.
up. And yeah, I mean, it really can, I think it can be boiled down to this very, ridiculously simple example that kind of helped me understand some of it. I would be curious to hear your thoughts. But, a lot of the time, the thought that would come up for me personally is like, how can you tell me I choose this, right? How can you tell me I choose fear? Nobody in their right mind would choose fear. Well, I mean, have you been to a cinema, to a horror movie? People
Perfect.
standing outside in a freaking line saying, "Here, take my hard earned cash. Just let me pay you so I can be scared," right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's it. And
exactly.
we need to kind of, we can sort of piggyback on that a little bit more. Where it gets scary is that we lose ourselves, right? So like, if you would lose yourself in that cinema to the point of like psychosis, where you're like, "Shit, this movie is real. I'm being, shit is about to go down," you would have a pretty horrible time. But as long as you remember yourself that you're actually safe in the cinema, enjoying an experience,
Yeah.
man, bring it, right? Fear,
Yeah, bring it on. Yeah.
Exquisite experience, yeah. Just like everything else, and that's the whole,
right.
The shadow, yeah.
So it's like, can you have deep access to infinite potentiality and eternity that transcends the viscera and the soma, and yet can you be so immersed in the viscera and the soma that you're willing to fully feel all of, especially the most repressed aspects of yourself, as part of your healing and awakening process? And so that's, again, a very holistic, integrative approach. And okay, so what you just said, okay, take if you're the only game in town as Infinity, you're the only game in town, and you can never leave yourself. You can only do these funny little information cycles of playing with yourself. So why, when you're like, when you've quote found out the physics of kind of like what you're looping and doing, then one of the things that comes up is like, okay, like I'm ready for another cycle. Like I'm ready to freaking contract even more ridiculously. I'm ready to, to simulate an even more intense dream to try to unwind from and wake up from. And it's like, that's a great part of deep realization. But now it's like, that was, I don't know, maybe a year or more ago, but now it's like, okay, what about all of the paintbrush aspects of the way that you can paint and relate and connect and be intimate with your fractals of yourself, but from this new source of all models place? Like, what about that part of your cycle of experience? What about that? And I think it's so important to say that, because it's like we sort of create an end, which is realization, but we don't create a like an all-encompassing embrace of infinite creation, including our unique interconnectivity and painting within that as part of the beautiful adventure itself. Like, I would love to be able to, the fact that I get to connect with a fractal of myself named Milo, like, good, like in the further like deepening and the further clarity and the further connectivity and the further shared musicality in the jam session. It's like, enjoy these parts of it. Yeah.
And I'll add something else to this that's interesting, right? Because have you ever, I mean, I know you have, because you obviously record videos for YouTube and stuff. Is there a difference when you talk to a mirror, when you talk to yourself, when you talk to a wall, as opposed to being on a jam session with somebody who's seemingly somebody else, right? So there's almost like that thing where we're wired for connection with somebody else, right? Like, there's a reason why you can't tickle yourself. It's impossible. You will not be surprised. You cannot tickle yourself, right?
Yeah.
And even why does it feel so much better to have somebody else scratch your back, right?
Right.
So there's
You also can't have sex with yourself.
Right. So there's
Right,
almost like a point in forgetting, because that allows for a different, maybe depth, not to call it a separate self, but maybe like a different intensity of that experience of separateness. Like, you can, if you're fully realized, and there's no attachment left to this human body, human form, you will not experience fear the same way when you see a truck coming at you on a highway and you know that it's about to end, the same way that a person that hasn't realized it. That it's just a different depth to experience. And that experience wants to be felt, wants to be known by the infinite, right? So hence the whole range of, forgetting yourself in order to have this experience. Because if you were fully aware, if I knew that I'm talking to myself right now, like, at such a visceral level, that it was literally the same as me getting off this call, walking up to a mirror in my room and just talking at myself, something would be lost.
Perfectly said. Yeah. Yep. Because watch. Talking at a mirror in a room or bathroom at yourself, it includes one way to say it is, it includes one observer or fractal and its statistical mechanical connection to the infinite repository of potentiality. Now, if you've included a second observer or another fractal of yourself, it has its own unique connectivity to the statistical mechanical potentiality of the infinite library. So now you're not doing the mirror thing, but now all of a sudden you're doing there's so much more possibility and potentiality that's spewing out at you from you in the connectivity. So that's
Painting with different colors. It's like, right, like, if you only had one brush, one color, you can create an awful lot with that, but you will be limited, right? Versus
I do not know what you are about to say next.
Yes.
Yeah. And so there's some sort of you're infinity right now, and you're contracting out your next dream reflection for me. And I love that. I love that feeling. It's like, give me what you're about to sing,
That's awesome, man. I think I'm not a jazz musician myself, or a jazz head. I appreciate the occasional tune, you know, over dinner, but I can feel why people just freaking love jazz improv, right? Because, you know, or
I would not have been able to tell you that you were going to talk about jazz improv. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
You perfectly gave me exactly what I asked for, which was out of infinity, you gave me jazz improv, and that's perfect analogy for See?
Oh, well, that just went really meta, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Right? Like I wouldn't surprise myself. I wouldn't surprise myself in this way, right? Like that's the whole thing. I can't tickle myself, and you just tickled a tiny bit of
yeah.
so meta.
Yeah, so meta.
Yeah. And then, you know, if we zoom out, right, essentially it wasn't you, it wasn't me, it was the, you know, it was the absolute playing this, you know, clowning with itself, right?
Clowning with itself, exactly. Yes. Oh, so good. And it's tickling itself. It's so good.
Well, brother, I did.
That's a great way to wrap. Yeah. A great way to wrap.
I did enjoy clowning with you, yeah, for 2 hours.
I enjoy clowning with you.